Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hello and welcome to the podcast, The Exploding Human, and I am Bob Nickman. I have a great guest today that I have known for over 30 years, Dr. Chris Norris. He wasn't a doctor when I met him, but he is now. He got a master's degree, and he is a behavioral specialist. He analyzes behaviors and recommends some treatments for people. It's a huge range of people that he works with, from autism to mental disorders to people with drug addiction, teenagers, homeless teenagers. He's worked all over the country and in Canada. Really interesting guy, and he talks about how he got started in this profession and how his work has influenced and been influenced by the other careers that he has had. One is he worked in security at nightclubs in New York City back in the day, and he is also an actor, a very accomplished actor. So behavior has played a part in both those careers, and he talks about that. It's really a great talk because, I've known him for a long time, so very open guy and a very passionate and dedicated professional who really cares about other people. And that's really why I love talking to these people, because they really, Chris is one of those guys that's committed his life to helping others. So let's listen in. This is Dr. Chris Norris, and we're going to talk about behavior. Hey, Dr. Chris Norris, sitting right across from me here at the Santa Monica Public Library. Thanks to the study rooms, I have a studio.
Nice.
Yeah. And tell us about the initials after your name.
Okay.
What they stand for, and then we'll get into this.
Yeah. Well, I went. I went back to school later in life. It was what was I, around 49, 48, 49. I got a master's in special education. I got a master's in counseling. And then I got a doctorate in counseling psychology, and that's what the EDD is. And then I got certified as a board-certified behavior analyst.
Is it mostly younger people, teenagers, or is that?
No, anyone from we help people from the crib to when they're very, very, very old. It just depends on what they need. Now, currently, insurance is only covering that type of board-certified behavior analytic work for people with autism and people with intellectual disability. So the people doing applied behavior analytics and people who are BCBAs, a board-certified behavior analyst, those folks are providing support and getting paid through insurance for people with autism and people with intellectual disability. That said, there's a lot of other areas that they can help.
Let's say I have a relative who's got something going on behaviorally, and I'm sent to you, or I find you, and is there certain types of tests? And then what? And then you refer the people to somebody else?
That's a great question. So we would assess using various assessment procedures. We have to determine what the function of the behavior is, and it's pretty involved. And then
So is it written tests,
would not
visual
be something
tests?
that we would work with the individual as well as observe the individual in their natural environment. We would be asking people that knew the individual questions to try to narrow down what in the environment might be influencing the behavior. We would look at all the various variables that what we would call independent variables in the environment that are influencing the behavior. So we would want to look at what's going on at home, what's going on at the school. And the journey to this particular job was quite elaborate because, I never imagined myself being a board certified behavior analyst or becoming one at age, I think it was 55.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was kind of later in life. I had worked in behavior my entire life. I started back in 1976 at a place called Mansfield Training School in Connecticut. And I had been asked to leave the campus at that time to live sort of off on my own. So I got a job working summers at an institution around the corner. And it was amazing because I thought I was lost, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And my parents had invested a lot of time and money up until that point in helping me get on the right track. And I had my own vision of what that track looked like. And that was not necessarily the vision they had, nor the vision the university had at that time. That said, the University of Connecticut was one of the best experiences I ever had because they saw something in me I didn't see in myself. There were some of my own behavior that was quite challenging back then that interfered with my ability to succeed academically. And
what are you talking about, drinking?
Well, it was a little of everything.
A little of everything.
So a little drinking, a little...
So you were
partying,
you were an explorer
with using various substances to either enhance or escape some feeling, something I thought I needed to do more of or less of, and I was not on the healthy road. Mm-hmm. And I landed in, my parents said, why don't you, and then I bought a motorcycle when I was 18, and my father had said, like, if you buy a motorcycle, you're not coming home. So I bought a motorcycle, and he said, well, you're done, and pick up your stuff. So I picked up my stuff, and you'd think on my motorcycle, but the motorcycle didn't even work. So my motorcycle and I were picked up in a van.
That's an 18-year-old decision there.
It was incredible. So I got transported back to Connecticut to go to finish up my school, and ended up at Mansfield Training School, and I worked privately for a while with a kid with autism. He was 16 years old. He was reminding me of the Jungle Boy. I mean, he was running around in his underwear. The institution was being sued by the state for incredible abuses at that time. There was 1,000 residents, both adults and adolescents, locked in the same facility. They were of various disabilities, from schizophrenia to autism. And back then we didn't know that much about autism in the late 70s. And so they put them all in the same area. And I remember walking on there because they hired me for a summer job working in recreation. And I remember walking onto the grounds, and this little kid with Down syndrome came over to me, and he just looked at me. He opened his mouth. He had been eating some dirt, and he had this big smile on his face with the dirt surrounding his teeth. And I just felt like I was home. He grabbed my hand, and he started walking me around and introducing me to all the other residents in this ward. Wow. And I was like, oh my God. And these folks were seriously impacted, right? But this kid made me feel welcome. It was the first time that this kid had no judgment and didn't know me from Adam. Yeah, opened his hand and took me and showed me around. His language was he communicated through sign. He communicated through utterances. He communicated through approximations of words, but not precisely words. And I understood every word. Everything that he was trying to communicate, I understood. And that was my first introduction to that particular population. And I thought, these are my people.
That's amazing. You know, the people with Downs have this very sort of childlike innocence that when you're around it,
absolutely.
You just go, wow, there's no pretense of anything other than just being alive. And most of the time, they're in a good place.
Their perception
emotionally.
of the world is much different than those of us of typical cognitive ability. And I appreciate their view. And so anyway, I started working with those folks and did that for quite a while, and saw some amazing changes. I started working with a guy at the University of Connecticut, and we used applied behavior analytics to help the young man I was working with, and I ended up working with him for 7 years.
Really?
Yeah, and saw him go from being this jungle boy type kid to living in a group home, being able to toilet himself, being able to go out on outings without hurting anybody. At that time, when I got him, he was pulling hair. He was, smearing feces. He was...
How old was he when you met him?
He was 16.
Oh, yeah, you said that. 16, and so by 23, he was able to live in a group home.
Yeah.
I'm pretty interested in this whole idea of autism because there's been, a surge in the diagnosis of that in the last number of years. I think I'm correct on that one because I hear it a lot.
Correct.
And obviously there's a whole spectrum of severity.
Correct.
And then there's a lot of theories about what causes it. And now I'm getting to talk to somebody who works with people. Do you have some insight that a regular person like me wouldn't have beyond, what I read?
Yeah, so for the cause of autism is still sort of not, we haven't put our finger on that. And I'm not a medical doctor, and those are the folks that would actually do those type of diagnoses. We don't diagnose. BCBAs don't diagnose.
You analyze and treat.
We look at the behavior. We look at what we can see. Just recently, we've started having discussions. There are some behavior analysts out there like Steve Hanley and DJ Moran and many others. Adele Najowski, who I work for over at Pepperdine University, she and the men that came before her started this whole thinking of that we need to look at the private moments, the private events that people got going on in there. Because up until then, we just looked at what we could see. If we couldn't see it, we didn't include it necessarily. If you told me how you felt, that wasn't necessarily something that would be helpful to me as a behavior analyst at that time. Now we have radical behaviorists who kind of look at these private events and see them as meaningful. They've come up with this thing called acceptance commitment therapy, where they, instead of trying to, in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, they help a person to sort of reframe the negative thinking and help them to find ways to see it differently. And with acceptance commitment therapy, they don't necessarily try to change the negative thinking. I don't know about you, but there's some thoughts that I had many, many years ago as a child that I still have as an adult. And all the efforts that I've made to try to change that negative thinking hasn't actually been as effective as sort of accepting the fact that I'm going to have these negative thoughts now and then. Now, what do I do with that? And so with acceptance commitment therapy, you learn how to sort of let it go. Sort of just say that's there, but it doesn't necessarily influence my behavior today. So how do I go about my day with knowing that I have this negative thought, but it's...
So maybe you're just changing the reaction that you have.
You're changing your perception of it.
Yeah.
All right. And so it's not necessarily novel thinking because they've been doing that in many other ways of therapy, but I like the way they framed it, and I've liked the way they put it together in a sort of... in a compact way of helping people From a behavioral perspective, those people that have been supervised by a behavior analyst that has been, trained in ACT, I think it's a good thing to use. That said, I don't think behavior analysts should be using it unless they've had supervision using ACT, because it is more than just what we've been trained in mostly up until now. It's a different type of support than, in my opinion, and anything I say on this recording is my opinion and not that of any place that I work. So anyway, from going back to the 70s, I moved from there and I got into private security work, and I realized that my asset was that I was able to read people's behavior relatively quickly. So I started working as a bodyguard. I worked in nightclubs in New York City. I worked for Yul Brynner. I worked at 54. The thing that I did best was being able to read people's behavior and redirect them without any physical intervention. Then I decided, I want to check out this acting thing. Mm-hmm. So I started studying actors' behavior, and then I started replicating that. And then I started studying acting, and I realized it was all about behavior, right? So I'd been doing that for quite a while. And then I got into working for the public school system, and then I worked for Children of the Night, which is a shelter for kids that are living on the street that are involved in prostitution and pornography. Dr. Lois Lee runs that. It's an amazing organization. If you haven't heard of it and you're looking for some place to, put some funds, that is a great organization, and the kids are amazing. I worked at the shelter and did outreach for them. And then I went off and worked at Covenant House up in Canada for a while. I was doing the X-Files up there, and I got a chance to work for Covenant House in the evenings and on the weekends, and that turned out to be, that's a place that takes care of kids that are living on the streets. And they provide shelter as well as outreach support, and they have drop-in centers. It's pretty phenomenal. And then I came back to the States, and then I've been working, in the public school as a teacher. I was a special ed teacher for a while, as a school counselor. I was an intervention specialist working with adolescents. And then I went, decided to keep going with the degrees, like I had said before. And this doctorate thing came about when I realized that I wanted to know more about why young people were having such a hard time sticking around, recovery. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I was seeing was a huge number of young people come in but not able to stay. And so I decided to study that. One of the things that jumped out for me that brought me to that was that the U.S. Health and Services did a study on, they found 1.3 million kids that were in need of help because of substance misuse or abuse.
That's a lot.
And 989,000 of them could not ask for help or did not ask for help. That's
because they didn't know about it, or they just wouldn't?
No, they knew about the help. They were exposed to the help. They just chose not to, 96%.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, that's an interesting question. Why is it that so many young people are out there? And what, like, I think in 2015, there was thousands and thousands of kids who died, from overdoses. Why weren't these kids able to stick around? What is missing? I find it fascinating that we still have such a huge number of young people that, for whatever reason, choose not to access the help that's available to them.
Yeah, I was trying to, as you were talking about that, I was trying to think, well, how did I think back then when I was 18 to 25 and had somebody approach me with, these options? I probably would have went, I'm not doing that. And I wouldn't even have known why, other than a grown-up is telling me I should do this.
Developmentally, we have seen, the back in years of my day when we were kids, adolescents went up to maybe 16 or 17.
Yeah.
maybe 18. Now it's up into, 23, 24, 25, 26 because kids are living at home. And we also have seen, that the more intense the parents, sort of hover around their children and organize their lives and direct them in every aspect of their life, and they don't get a chance to learn some of the lessons that are available to them, that these kids, when they get faced with these challenges down the road, are not able to cope with them. And so they don't, some of these kids that are struggling didn't necessarily come from abusive homes. Now, many of them did. Many of them have a long history of abuse or challenging circumstances in which they grew up. But there's still a core group of them out there that came from very loving homes that they just, because of not having learned the coping mechanisms necessary to deal with some of the challenges life throws at them, which are, typical for anybody, they find other avenues in which to escape, or which to find enhancement, or they believe enhancement in terms of whatever experience they're having.
Well, there is sort of a natural tendency as a parent to want to protect. But what happens is, as the kids get older, when they're little, you have to do that. It's required for their survival. You have to do everything when they're babies, and But then at a certain age, for a parent to be able to go, all right, well, go fall down, go fail, go mess this thing up. Let's see what happens, rather than I'm going to get in there and fix it. And I think that's a really hard thing for a parent to sort of make that transition to go from, manager to consultant.
There's a great website called searchinstitute.org. I encourage your listeners to check that out. It's got 40 assets on there. And it says that the kids are exposed to these 40 assets at a younger age, and it's all science-based, that there's a higher likelihood they'll be able to deal with some of the challenges that come their way as adults. When I do parent trainings, I often tell the parents, if you're on the phone with your girlfriend or a buddy and you're using descriptive language and you're using all kinds of vocabulary in order to communicate your point, and your child is listening to that, they too will communicate their points in a similar way. When you scream at them across the room and tell them to turn the television down because you're on the phone, they will then scream across the room in their classrooms and tell people what they should be doing. When you give them a smack or a rap to correct behavior instantly because you think that they're doing something inappropriately, well, they're going to use those behaviors as well as a way of dealing with people that aren't doing what they want. So we need to demonstrate different behaviors with our kids. We need to play with them. We need to sit with them and do the work. I realize parents are working, 1 and 2 jobs a day, but they have to find a way. And if they can't do it themselves, they need to find a community resource that will put children with adults that are going to be playing with them and working with them so that they can see what that looks like, what that feels like. They can make those connections, right? Because we just keep sending them to the room to do their work. They're not going to do it. And very often, if they do it, they do it with a resentment, or they do it because they're trying to earn something from you, like your love. I don't know if anybody of your listeners have that experience, perhaps, that they felt like their entire life they were working to try to get their parents to recognize them, trying to get their love, right? So everything that they did was in an effort to try to get that recognition. And then when, they have children, they could continue that cycle. So how do we go away from that cycle then and let the kid know that, we love you unconditionally, there are things that you may do that we don't agree with and we would prefer you not to do. So we want to redirect that behavior by offering incentives to do things more constructively, more beneficial to them as socially appropriate. So
it seems like part of what you do then is training parents on how to be
very much so.
Interact with these kids, the ones that have emotional issues or
very much so. I spend most of my time training the people these days that work with the kids, whether I'm teaching them in a classroom or I'm working in their classroom, or I'm talking with parents during parent trainings or talking with parents about their situation at home.
Do you actually go into people's homes then?
I don't currently, but when I retire from public service, I'll be able to do that.
There was a TV show, I don't even know if it's still on anymore. It was this English nanny, and she would move in with these families and basically teach them how to parent, how to set boundaries. And
yes.
It was I loved the show because it was just, these kids were just regular kids. They didn't have any necessarily special needs. But you could see where she was like, your parenting is just way off here. And here's what it's like the parents didn't want to be the bad guys. They wanted to be liked.
Right.
That was a lot of it. Or they were just unaware of the effect they were having on their kids. It was,
you can provide structure without it being aversive.
You
don't have, it doesn't have to be an aversive experience. I remember I think that is one of the reasons why young people sometimes shy away from structure, is because it's presented in such a way it doesn't seem appealing. Having listened to the stories that I've listened to over the years, and then of course my own study, that was one of the things that I found, like the way they found the excitement about living a life differently than the one they had been living using alcohol and drugs, was because they found it more appealing. They found it more appealing, that they saw attributes in the people that were mentoring them that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were willing to do the things that are necessary in order to live that type of life. And that, I think, is a big piece of the puzzle. That, and also transparency. I think that, we as adults need to learn how to be transparent with our children, and also help them to learn to be transparent with us without the fear of punishment. Like, your child is not going to tell you everything that's going on in their life if they feel like there's major, consequences coming down the road. Now, not to say that there shouldn't be some consequences, but how those consequences are presented and in what format, I think is a big piece of the puzzle for, skill acquisition and change. It has to be in a way that the kid can sort of interpret what it is that's ultimately being asked of them. Very often we tell kids what not to do. Why don't we just tell them what to do?
Yeah.
As opposed to what not to do.
It kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
and they might do it and they might not.
Even looking back on my days working security back in the day, I mean, I remember going up to drunks in the bars or aggressive, folks that were in the restaurants that I was working, or paparazzi. They were approaching whatever celebrity I was working with at the time. And the way that I was most successful in dealing with them was not in telling them what not to do, but in telling them what to do. Why don't you stand over here?
Mm-hmm.
I understand you're feeling upset about this. I can understand that makes sense. Come with me. Let's talk over here. So all these verses, you can't act like that. You shouldn't be doing that. You need to get out of here, get that thing out of his face, blah, blah, blah. You can do a lot more by telling people what to do than what not to do. And a lot of that comes from, B.F. Skinner's, I don't know if you're familiar with
positive reinforcement.
Yeah, back in the old days, right?
One of the things I do with people is I ask them questions. I mean, I'm doing that here, but because it's an interview. But if they're acting a certain way, I I try not to. I start to ask them, which shows an interest, and then they can offer something, and then I'll maybe steer it with another question.
Yes.
And I do that in work environments too, because that way I'm not saying anything definitive. I'm letting the other person, guide it or think that they're guiding what's going on.
When I used to teach, I had students that definitely challenged me and my system on the way things were going. But I would often say to them, I would say, and perhaps in a loud, assertive voice, you are one of the most amazing young people I know, have such great potential. I'm still curious at why you would continue to behave in the way that you have when you have the alternative to work in this other way. Can you explain to me that? Because I think you have great promise. And they're like, well, he's loud, he's being forceful, but he's talking about how wonderful I am. Like, I've never heard it like that before. This one kid, she was about to get jumped into a gang, and I desperately wanted her not to do that. And I remember having a very passionate conversation with her. But at the end of the conversation, she understood how much I cared for her and how important it was for me that she give herself this. I had gotten her into college, and she was the most amazing kid, just brilliant and lovely. And I just wanted her to have a different life if she could get her head around it. So I think there's a time and place for passion, but sure. I think that it's the words that come out that are important.
What choice did she make?
I'm going to say that she made the right choice at that time. I'm not sure where she's at today. But
sometimes
many moons ago. But I left her in a good place. I'd like to think. I know there was another kiddo that I worked with in Canada that I know for sure because she had done things that had jeopardized her life over and over and again. Back in those days, I was pulling kids out from behind dumpsters, with IV drug needles in their arms. They were 12 years old. I'd put them in treatment. They'd be out the next day because they'd have a choice not to be in treatment. And I would do that over and over and over. And this one kiddo was doing things that were interfering with her ability to live, period. And I finally realized that I couldn't continue to rescue her. So I said to her, look, next time you call me, I'm going to tell you need to call 911. You need to help yourself. You need to do something for yourself. Like, we're not going to run out to save you this time. And she did. And she's still doing great. She's alive. She's well. She's an adult woman. She knows how to access resources. She's not living on the street. So I've got a lot of success stories. Mm-hmm. We need to passionately enable our young people. An elder, I love going to First Nation sweat lodges, and I do vision quests from time to time, and have had the honor of sitting. And one of the elders came up to me after a sweat lodge, and she said, "It's time for you to start working with the young people." As I got older, she realized that that it was, the time that we work with the young people can sometimes be taxing, especially if you're working with challenging populations. So how you do self-care, the things that you do to take care of yourself, whether it's through time out, and mine is like going on these vision quests. Or sitting in a sweat lodge with like-minded people, sort of all of us moving in the same direction. I'm finding that self-care is a huge part of being able to continue to work with populations. A lot of the young people I work with today, because of the severity of their disability, may not have language, may not have toilet, and they may be young adults. You have a very difficult time communicating because nobody has taken the time to teach them. And that's one thing that applied behavior analytics can do, is teach a person how to communicate, using various, methods to do that.
Is music part of that?
I think music is most definitely part of that. One of the more satiating activities for folks that are struggling is listening to music. That is a sensory that hearing is something that these kids have had to rely on because they never were taught verbal speech or were never given a way to communicate. So sometimes listening to music is a way for them to sort of decompress and relax. Also, sometimes the noises in the environment are very disconcerting to some folks, and putting on headphones and allowing them to listen to more calm tones are very helpful for some folks. And certainly, I've seen young people sort of embrace using music as a way to express their frustration, as a way to express their passion or love for something. This business of using music in recovery is really beneficial, I think, and I think it's a great way for people to express themselves. I've seen drama also used in a similar way, where playwrights or actors go into a therapeutic setting, and the people that are there work on drama, a way to communicate where they're at through writing and then self-expression, whether it be poetry. I think, using all those modalities is a wonderful way of helping people to sort of get right with their world.
Well, it makes sense, to use the arts
Yeah.
in equal measure to science, and certainly
Very therapeutic.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much medication is part of a lot of the stuff that you do, and what you think about it, and what where it's appropriate, where it might not be, where it's overused.
It's a fascinating topic. Certainly, I'm not a doctor of medicine, so I would not be someone that would be prescribing medicine. I would refer someone to a psychiatrist or a medical doctor for that. I have seen great success with folks that have used medicine as a way of sort of evening the playing field, as it were, and then can access new ways of living through therapy. I like therapy working in conjunction with medicine. And I understand that some people need to take medicine to continue to even that playing field throughout their lives. And that is, again, if it's working, then fantastic. I understand parents' fear around medicine. And certainly, I think that you should exhaust all resources and all options, but work in conjunction with your doctor and take the advice that you're given. And you should be working with a doctor that you trust.
It just seems like there's so many pieces to any person's case.
And the things keep changing. The medicines keep changing. So there's all various ways of helping people. That whole thing that you did on stem cell.
Yeah,
that was phenomenal.
I didn't know anything about that other than just hearing stem cell.
That's remarkable that a young rock star would find his way to such an intervention that benefited his life so significantly. I think looking at a child's diet, we have a lot of kids coming into schools that are eating Cheetos on the way to schools. They don't have the healthy food markets
Sugars
in their neighborhoods. So they're coming to school drinking, caffeinated drinks along with, I say Cheetos because it seems like every kid has these little red fingers and these Cheetos from these food trucks that are parked not too far from their school or in a bodega near their school. And they, And that's not healthy. And
No.
they're dealing with weight issues as well as their own behavioral issues. And also they find that particular food the most reinforcing. And sometimes, our well-intentioned providers sometimes use that as a way. And I often tell them, like, can we find more healthy food versus these foods that are being offered to the kids, whether it's like M&Ms or other
right. Well, the idea of only eating things that have zero nutritional value is over an extended period of time seems, it seems insane is what it seems. But some people just don't know. They haven't been taught. They don't understand. And plus, it's inexpensive.
Right, and the food's not available to them in the neighborhoods. If you go down in certain neighborhoods of Los Angeles, you are only going to find food markets that are providing these fast foods versus the other food markets when you go up into other areas of Los Angeles that are offering all kinds of healthy options. You can get, freeze-dried fruit that is very good and quite delicious. And I would think have as much of an appeal had the children been exposed to it as, say, a bag of M&Ms. I don't know. I mean, I would say that would be an interesting study to put a healthy food market in one of our impacted neighborhoods and to see if there's any impact, right? And I love the fact that our schools are now making a more conscious effort to provide healthy alternatives, and not putting vending machines on the campuses that are exposing our young people to only
I was just thinking about
unhealthy
the cafeteria in my middle school. The junk that was just swimming in grease and cheese and just like the most horrific
and
stuff.
I know that the school systems are making an effort to do that, and I applaud their efforts, and I hope that continues. I know that that's an important piece of the puzzle is nutrition for our young people.
Now you're working in a school system now?
I work for public school system.
And is it K through 12 that you work with, or is it high school only? What is it?
Yeah, it's K through 12.
Okay, so you see a lot of whole spectrum of people.
We have an amazing public school system with amazing teachers and the support providers for those teachers. That's one of my favorite parts of my day is to go and visit a classroom and see a new teacher who's still got that light in their eyes, And the challenging thing for me is to make sure that they have everything that they need in order to be successful.
It's a big challenge too because of the economics and the unwieldiness of how many people have to be taken care of and
that's
bureaucracy.
A whole nother
we
podcast.
Won't talk about that today
because there are maybe that's just a whole nother conversation. I will tell you though that I have thoroughly enjoyed my time working for the public sector and have found that the people I've worked with be phenomenal and love kids. The people that surround me and my work have been,
that's
special.
That's really nice to hear.
Yeah.
Somebody that loves what they do and has a lot of respect for their colleagues. That's just fantastic.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I've been blessed.
Are there some resources that if people are curious, let's say they have a child or a loved one that's having some problems, what would you recommend they do in terms of getting the kind of help they would need? Or websites, whatever, books,
I would definitely look at there are many private agencies that offer support for people with autism and people with intellectual disabilities that is covered by your insurance. I would definitely look at the agencies that have a high prevalence of BCBAs. I would look at agencies where the CEOs are people that have a very well-grounded knowledge of applied behavior analytics. And I'm not saying that's to end all.
Right.
I think it's important that they also have a good, rounded view, a holistic view of other resources that are available to families beyond applied behavior analytics because sometimes it's a multidisciplinary approach. If you do have a young person that you think, you can get your child assessed at the regional centers for free.
When you say regional centers of what?
In Los Angeles, there's many regional centers.
Oh, they're called just regional centers?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
And you can get referrals from your doctor. Going to your doctor to get assessments is important. I know some parents have fear of that, but if the alternative is your child doesn't get the help they need,
Right.
then I've seen kids that have not been in school since, and they're 8 years old because of their behavior and other challenges they might be having, and that's not necessary. There are resources out there for the parents. So get with your school. Go to your school. If you're not sure what to do, go to your school, a local school, and ask them what to do. Ask them where you can go to get the help you need. Once you're in a school, then keep communicating with your teachers. You got to be part of the solution. If you just send your kid to school and expect the school to take over for the next 6 hours and you're not part of the solution, that's not a way of parenting in a way that I would think would be most beneficial. Be part of your children's life. Like do their homework with them, play with them. Don't put them in front of the TV for hours and hours and hours. If you want to have long-term impact and long-term connection with your kids, then early on you've got to develop and nurture that relationship. So be part of the solution by being part of their life. Ask them questions. Find ways to help them realize their dreams. Mm-hmm. It may not be the dream you realize for them, but it may be important to them. So find ways to spend time with them, to get to know them, and by all, play with them. I mean, roll around with them, play games with them, enjoy them. I mean, this is the blessing of having a young person in your life. And if you want them to be older young people that have a healthy connection with their parents, then you got to do this work early.
Very good. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Dr. Chris Norris. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you coming over and doing the podcast, and I appreciate you folks that are listening to the podcast. I think that I'm having the greatest time meeting these people and talking to them about what they do. That's why I'm doing it. Keep doing it. So keep coming back so I can keep doing it. All right. Thank you, folks. Bye.